Through the Desert by Henryk Sienkiewicz. If you really enjoy my work, you can buy me a coffee using the link below the video. Chapter 36. On the 5th day of their journey, Staś rode with Nell on King, for they had come to a broad belt of acacias, which were so thick that the horses had to follow in the path made by the elephant. It was now early in the morning, and the landscape was glistening, fresh with dew. The children talked about the journey, and how every day was bringing them nearer to their fathers, for both children had never ceased to long for them since they were taken from Fayoum. Their conversation centered around this subject, and they always ended by weeping. They repeated over and over again the same thoughts. Their fathers think that they are now dead, or that they have disappeared never to return. Both are grieving, and although hope is well nigh dead, they send Arabians to Khartoum to try to get news of them, and all this time they are not only far away from Khartoum, but also from Fashoda. In 5 days they will be even further off, then further and further still, and at last they will reach the ocean, or perhaps before they come to the sea, they may reach a place where they can send a telegram. The only person in the caravan who knew what they had before them was Staś, while Nell was positively convinced that there was nothing in the world that he could not achieve, and she was quite sure that he would bring her to the coast. So she anticipated events and planned in her little head more than once what would happen when the first news of them should be received. Chirping like a little bird, she told Staś about it. "Our papas," she said, "are sitting in Port Said, and they are weeping. Then suddenly a boy comes in with a telegram. What's that? Either your papa or mine opens it, looks at the signature and reads, 'Staś and Nell! How happy they are! They will make all haste to meet us. There will be joy in the whole house. Our papas and everyone in the house will be happy. They will be delighted and will immediately come driving up. I shall fall on papa's neck, then we shall always be together, and the tale ended with Nell's chin beginning to tremble, her beautiful eyes turning into 2 fountains, and finally by leaning her little head on Staś's shoulder and crying for sorrow, longing, and joy at the thought of the future meeting. Staś rather imagined that his father would be proud of him and would say to him, "You have acted like a true Pole," and he was then overcome by emotion, great longing and enthusiasm, and an immovable courage, hard as steel, took possession of his heart. "I must," he said to himself in these moments, "save Nell. I must go through these trials." Then it seemed to him that there were no dangers he could not face, no obstacles he could not overcome. But the final victory was far off yet. They worked their way through the grove of acacias, the long thorns of the bushes tearing even the hide of the elephant. Eventually more light penetrated the forest, and through the branches of the scattered trees a gray jungle could be seen in the distance. Although the heat was very oppressive, Staś climbed out of the palanquin, settled himself on King's neck, and looked around in search of herds of antelope or zebras, for he determined to provide more meat for them to eat. To the right he saw 2 gazelles, and beyond them 2 ostriches. On passing the last group of trees, the elephant turned off to the left, and then a different sight presented itself to the boy. Half a kilometer away he saw a very large field of manioc, and on the edge of the field several black people apparently busy working. "Negroes!" he cried out, turning to Nell. His heart began to beat violently. For a moment he hesitated whether he should not return and hide in the acacias, but it occurred to him that in an inhabited district one must sooner or later be obliged to meet its inhabitants and have relations with them, and that the fate of their journey would depend on the nature of these relations. So after quick reflection he guided the elephant toward the field. At the same moment Kali also appeared, and pointing to the group of trees, said, "Great man, over there is a Negro village, and women are working in the manioc fields. Shall I ride to them?" "We will ride there together," answered Staś, "and then you will tell them that we come as friends." "Sir, I know what to say to them," cried the young Negro, feeling his great importance. Turning his horse toward the workers, he placed his hands trumpet-like to his mouth and cried, "Jambo he, Jambo sana!" When the women, who were very busy digging up the manioc roots, heard his voice, they sprang up and stood as if rooted to the spot. But this quiet only lasted a moment, for they began to scream and run off toward the trees, in the midst of which the village lay, in their excitement leaving their hoes and rakes behind them. The small wanderers approached this village slowly and silently. The thicket resounded with the howling of several hundred voices, then silence reigned. At last the hollow, penetrating beating of a drum was heard, which continued incessantly for some time. This was evidently to call the warriors to war, for suddenly more than 300 of them appeared from out of the bushes, and they all stood in one long line before the village. When 100 feet distant, Staś brought King to a standstill and began to look at them. The sun beat down on their well-formed bodies, on their broad chests, and their strong shoulders. They were armed with bows and spears. Around their hips they wore short skirts of heather or monkey skin. Their heads were adorned with ostrich and parrot feathers or large wigs made of baboons' scalps. They looked warlike and menacing, but stood silent and immovable, for they were so utterly astonished that their inclination to fight was kept within bounds. All eyes were fixed on King, on the white palanquin, and on the white person sitting on the neck of the elephant. And yet elephants were not strangers to them. On the contrary, they were continually at the mercy of elephants, for at night whole herds would destroy their manioc fields and their plantations of bananas and palms. As spears and arrows cannot pierce an elephant's hide, the poor Negroes fought against the mischief-makers by means of fire and screams, in which they imitated the crowing of cocks, and they dug out trenches and made traps with tree trunks. But they had never seen an elephant made the slave of man, and allowing him to sit on its neck, and none of them was able to account for this extraordinary sight. What they saw so transcended their wildest imaginations that they did not know what course to pursue, whether to fight or to run away as fast as their feet could carry them and leave the rest to chance. Full of doubt, fear, and surprise, they continually whispered to one another, "Oh, mother! What are these beings who come here to us, and how will they be disposed toward us?" Kali, who had ridden up to within a spear's throw of them, raised himself up in his stirrups and cried, "People, people, listen to the voice of Kali, the son of Fumba, the powerful king of the Wahimas, who live on the banks of the Baso Narok. Oh, hear, hear, and if you understand him, listen to every word he is going to say." "We understand," rang the answer from 300 throats. "Let your king advance, let him tell me his name, and let him open his ears and lips so that he can hear better." "Mrua!" Many voices began to cry out. Mrua stepped out of the rank and file, but took only 3 steps forward. He was an aged Negro, tall and strongly built, but who evidently had no courage to spare, for his legs trembled so that he had to dig the point of his spear into the ground and to lean on its hilt to keep from falling. Other warriors followed his example and dug their spears into the ground, as a sign that they wished to listen peacefully to the tidings of the stranger. Thereupon Kali declaimed at the top of his voice, "Mrua, and you, Mrua's people, you have heard that the son of the king of the Wahimas is talking to you, whose cows cover the mountains around the Baso Narok as ants cover the carcass of a dead giraffe. And what is Kali, the son of the king of the Wahimas, saying? He is telling you a great piece of good news, which is that the good Misimu has come to your village." Then he cried still louder, "So it is, the good Misimu, do!" From the silence that ensued, one could readily guess what a tremendous effect Kali's words had aroused. The warriors began to separate and then to form in groups. Some advanced a few steps through curiosity, whilst others drew back through fear. Mrua leaned with both hands on his spear, and for a short time perfect silence ensued, followed by a slight whispering through the ranks, and one voice at a time repeated, "Mshimu! Mshimu!" and here and there the cries, "Yanchig! Yanchig!" which expressed admiration and welcome, were to be heard. But Kali's voice rose again above the noises and screams. "Gaze and be happy. The good Msimu is sitting over there in the white hut on the back of the large elephant, and the large elephant obeys it like a slave obeys his master and a child obeys his mother. Oh, neither you nor your fathers have ever seen anything like this." "No, no, we have never seen anything like this. Yantsig! Yantsig!" The eyes of all the warriors turned to the hut, in other words, to the palanquin. And Kali, who in the course of the religious training he had received on Linda Mountain had been told that faith can move mountains, was quite convinced that the prayer of the white bibi was all-powerful with God, and so he continued to speak, as he thought truthfully, about the good Mzimu. Listen, listen, the good Mzimu is riding on the elephant to that country in which the sun rises out of the water behind the mountains. There the good Mzimu will tell the Great Spirit to send you clouds, and these clouds will, in seasons of drought, water your millet, your manioc, your bananas, and the grass in the jungle, so that you will have plenty to eat, and your cows will have good fodder and will give rich milk. Do you, O people, need food and milk? We need it! We need it! And the good Mzimu will tell the Great Spirit to send you a wind, which will blow away from your village that sickness which honeycombs the body. Do you, O people, want it to blow the sickness away? Let it blow it away. And at the prayer of the good Mzimu, the Great Spirit will protect you from attacks, from slavery, from damage to your fields, from lions, from panthers, from snakes, and from locusts. Let him do it! Now listen, look and see who sits in front of the hut between the ears of the terrible elephant. There is Bwana Kubwa, the white man, great and strong, whom even the elephant fears. He, who has thunder in his hands and uses it to kill bad men. He, who kills lions. He, who sends up fiery snakes. He, who breaks rocks. But who will do you no harm if you will respect the good Mzimu. Yansig, Yansig, and if you will bring him dried banana flour, eggs, fresh milk, and honey. Yanchig, Yanchig! Then come nearer and fall on your faces before the good Mzimu. Mrua and his warriors started off, repeating continuously, Yanchig, Yanchig! Then approaching cautiously, they moved a short distance nearer, for their steps were halted by their superstitious fear of the Mzimu and the elephant. The sight of Saba also filled them with terror, for they took him to be a wobo, a large golden leopard, inhabiting that district and also southern Abyssinia, which the natives fear more than a lion because it is especially fond of human flesh and is even bold enough to attack armed men. But they were pacified on seeing that the little fat-faced Negro held the terrible wobo by a leash. This gave them a still higher conception of the power of the good Mzimu, and also of the white man, and while looking first at the white elephant, then at Saba, they whispered to each other, If they have even bewitched Wobo, who in the world can struggle successfully against them? But the most solemn moment was when Staś, turning to Nell, bowed low and then pushed back the sides of the palanquin, which were arranged like curtains, and showed the good Mzimu to the assembled multitude. Mrua and every one of the warriors fell on their faces, so that their bodies formed a long, living bridge. None dared to move, and all hearts were even more terror-stricken when just at that very moment King, either by order of Staś or of his own accord, threw up his trunk and began to trumpet very loud, and Saba followed his example in the deepest bass which he could muster. Then there rang out from the hearts of all the warriors a cry like a beseeching groaning, Aka! 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 And this lasted a long while, until Kali continued, O Mrua and you children of Mrua, you have now done reverence before the good Mzimu, so arise and fill your eyes with the sight of it, for whoever does this, over him will be the blessing of the Great Spirit. Banish all fear from your hearts, and know that where the good Mzimu is, human blood cannot be shed. At these words, and especially after the explanation that on account of the good Mzimu none could be carried away by death, Mrua stood up, and the other warriors followed his example, and they began shyly, but also with great curiosity, to gaze at the gracious Godhead. If Kali had asked them a second time, they would certainly have had to confess that neither their fathers nor they had ever seen anything like this. For their eyes were accustomed to mask-like, grotesque figures of idols, made out of wood and hairy coconuts, and now there stood before them on the back of the elephant a blonde, gentle, sweet, and smiling Godhead, resembling a white bird and a white flower, and so they gained confidence. Their hearts breathed freely once more, their thick lips began to smile, and unconsciously stretching their hands out toward the wonderful apparition, they cried, "Oh, Yansig, Yansig, Yansig!" But Staś, who noticed everything that was going on, perceived as soon as Kali stopped speaking that a Negro, adorned with a pointed cap of ratskin, had slipped out of line, and, gliding along in the grass like a snake, had gone in the direction of a solitary hut lying at the rear of the enclosure. which was surrounded by a high railing held together by creepers. Meanwhile, the good Mzimu, though greatly embarrassed by being set up as a godhead, put out her little hand at Staś's request and greeted the Negroes. The black warriors, their eyes shining with pleasure, followed every movement of this little hand, believing that it possessed a powerful charm which would protect them against many misfortunes. Some, while striking their cheeks and hips, said, "Oh, mother! Now everything will go well with us and with our cows." Mrua, who had already become quite familiar, approached the elephant, prostrated himself, striking the ground with his forehead before the good Mzimu, and whilst kneeling said to Staś, "Would the great man, who leads the white godhead on the elephant, like to eat a piece of Mrua, and would he agree to let Mrua eat a piece of him, so that we shall be brothers, between whom there is no deceit or treason?" Kali immediately interpreted these words, but as he saw by Staś's face that the latter had no inclination to taste a piece of Mrua, he turned to the Negro and said, "Oh, Mrua, do you really think that the white man who is so powerful that the elephant fears him, who has the thunder within his grasp, who kills lions, before whom Wobo wags his tail, who commands fiery snakes to rise up into the sky and who shatters rocks, do you think that he can pledge blood brotherhood with any king he may happen to meet? But rather think whether the Great Spirit will not punish you for being so presumptuous, and whether it will not be honor enough for you to eat a piece of Kali, the son of Fumba, the ruler of the Wahima, and Kali, son of Fumba, to eat a piece of you." "Are you his slave?" asked Mrua. "The great man neither stole nor bought Kali, but only saved his life. That is why Kali leads the good Mzimu and the man into the land of the Wahima, so that the Wahima and Fumba can show them respect and bring them many presents. Let it be as you say, and Mrua shall eat a piece of Kali, and Kali a piece of Mrua." "So let it be," repeated the warriors. "Where is the sorcerer?" asked the king. "Where is the sorcerer? Where is the sorcerer? Where is Kamba?" at once cried many voices. Then something happened that might have completely changed the situation, clouded the friendly relations, and converted the Negroes into the enemies of their newly arrived guests. From the hut which stood apart, surrounded by a special fence, there suddenly came an infernal noise. It was like the roar of a lion, the clap of thunder, the blast of trumpets, the laugh of a hyena, the howl of a wolf, and the terrible squeak of rusty hinges. When King heard these awful sounds, he began to roar. Saba began to bark, and the donkey, on which Nasibu sat, to cry out, "Jah!" The warriors sprang up as if drenched with boiling water and tore their spears out of the ground. Terrible confusion ensued. The disturbing cries of, "Our Mzimu! Our Mzimu!" reached Staś's ears, and the respect and goodwill with which the Negroes had looked upon the newcomers disappeared in an instant. The savages began to throw suspicious and hostile glances around. Amongst the crowd a threatening noise was heard, and the awful din in the lonely hut increased more and more. Kali was troubled, and bending over quickly to Staś, he began to whisper, his voice filled with emotion and fright. "Sir, the sorcerer has awakened the bad Mzimu, who fears that he will not receive any presents, and is roaring with rage. Sir, pacify the sorcerer and the bad Mzimu with generous gifts, otherwise these people will turn against us." "Pacify them!" cried Staś. He suddenly became enraged against the wickedness and covetousness of the sorcerer. He was also greatly alarmed at this unlooked-for danger. The expression of his tanned face changed, just as it had done when he shot down Geber, Camus, and the two Bedouins. His eyes shone threateningly, and he bit his lips, clenched his fists, and his cheeks grew pale. "Ah, I will soon pacify them," he said. Without wasting any time, he led the elephant toward the hut. Kali, who was afraid to remain alone among the Negroes, followed him. Then rose from the warriors a loud cry, whether of fear or rage it was hard to tell, but before they could regain their composure, the railing creaked and broke down under the shock of the elephant's head. The clay walls of the hut fell apart, the roof caved in, a cloud of ruins and dust flew into the air, and after a while, Mrua and his people saw the long, black, upturned trunk on the end of which was the sorcerer, Kamba. Illustration: the people saw the long, black trunk on the end of which was the sorcerer, Kamba. Staś, who saw on the floor of the hut a large drum made out of a hollowed-out tree and covered with a monkey skin, made Kali give it to him, and turning around, he stood facing the warriors, looking straight into their eyes. "Hear, O people," he said in a loud, resounding voice. "It was not your Mzimu who roared, but only that villain there, who pounds the drum to wring presents from you, and you are as afraid of him as children." At these words he took hold of the string which was drawn through the dried skin of the drum, and began to pull at it and twist it with all his might. The same sounds which had terrified the Negroes before now rang out again, only much louder, for the walls of the hut did not smother them. "Oh, how foolish are Mrua and his children!" cried Kali. Stash handed him the drum, and Kali beat so frantically that for a while one could not hear oneself talk. When he tired of this, he threw the drum at Mrua's feet, and mid shrieks of laughter said, "That thing is your Mzimu." Then, chattering, after the custom of Negroes, he addressed the warriors, and was by no means sparing in expressing his contempt for them and for Mrua, and in holding them up to ridicule. He pointed to Kamba and explained to them that this thief in the rat-skin cap had deceived them for many a rainy and dry season, and that they had rewarded him by feeding him with beans, young goats, and honey. Is it possible that there could be a more stupid king and a more stupid people than these? They believed in the power of an old witch and in his witchcraft, and now they see how this great sorcerer hangs from the trunk of an elephant and cries, "Aka," begging mercy of the white man. Where is his power now? Where is his witchcraft? Why does Mzimu not roar to protect him? Ah, what sort of thing is your Mzimu? A strip of monkey skin and a piece of a rotten tree trunk which the elephant has destroyed. Neither the women nor the children of the Wahimas would have been afraid of such a Mzimu, and Mrua and his men were afraid of it. There is only one real Mzimu, and one really great and powerful man, and to him they ought to show respect, and bring as many presents as they can, for otherwise they will be afflicted with misfortunes, such as they had never dreamed of. This harangue to the Negroes was quite unnecessary, for the sorcerer with his wicked Mzimu had proved himself to be weaker than the new god in such an extraordinary manner, and Stash satisfied them so well that they forswore their allegiance to the sorcerer and covered him with shame. Again they cried out, "Yansig," even more humbly and earnestly than before. They were so angry now with themselves for having been deceived by Kamba during many years that they insisted on killing him. Mrua begged Stash to let them bind him and keep him until they had invented a death of dreadful torture for him. But Nell decided to spare his life, and as Kali had told them that no human blood could be shed in presence of the good Mzimu, Stash only permitted them to drive the unhappy sorcerer from the village with shame and ignominy. Kamba, who feared he would be put to death by their cleverly devised tortures, fell on his face before the good Mzimu, and weeping bitterly, thanked her for his deliverance. From this time forth there was nothing to mar the awe they inspired. Women and children now came from behind the fence, for the news of the extraordinary guest had already spread throughout the entire village, and the desire to see the white Mzimu was greater than their fear of her. For the first time in their lives, Stash and Nell saw a settlement of real savages, who had never been visited even by Arabs. The clothing of these Negroes consisted only of heather aprons or of a skin wound around the hips, and every one was tattooed. The men as well as the women had their ears pierced, and through these holes they had thrust such long pieces of wood or bone that the lobes of their ears were drawn down to their shoulders. In their lower lips they wore a lip ring, a round piece of wood or bone the size of a saucer. Those of highest rank, such as warriors and their wives, wore around their necks steel or brass wire collars, so high and stiff that they could scarcely turn their heads. They evidently belonged to the Shilluk tribe, which reached far toward the east, for Kali and Mia knew their language well, and Stash could understand some things they said. Their legs were not so long as those of their compatriots who live in the district of the Nile. They were of shorter stature, their shoulders were broader, and they looked less like wattle birds. The children resembled large fleas, and not being disfigured by the paleli, they were decidedly better looking than the grown people. After the women had stared long enough at the good Mzimu from a distance, they vied with the warriors in bringing presents, young goats, fowls, eggs, black beans, and beer made from millet. This lasted until Staś forbade them to bring any more. He paid them generously with glass beads and colored percale, and Nell distributed tiny mirrors among the children. And so there was great rejoicing throughout the village, and joyful cries resounded about the tent occupied by the little travelers. Then the warriors held a war dance and a skillfully devised sham battle in honor of the guests, after which one of the warriors suggested the cementing of a bond of fellowship between Kali and Mrua. As Kamba, who was usually one of the principal figures in such a ceremony, had gone off, an old Negro who was very familiar with the formula took his place. After he had killed a young goat, removed the liver and divided it in several large pieces, he began to twirl around on hands and feet like a flywheel, and looking first at Kali, then at Mrua, said in a solemn voice, "Kali, the son of Fumba, will you eat a piece of Mrua, the son of Mumkuli, and you, Mrua, son of Mumkuli, will you eat a piece of Kali, the son of Fumba?" "We will," cried the future brothers. "Do you wish that Kali's heart should be Mrua's heart, and Mrua's heart should be Kali's heart? We wish it. And the hands, the spears, and the cows, and everything which either one possesses now or will possess, whatever he possesses and will possess, and that between you there shall be neither falsehood, treason, nor hate, and that neither of you shall rob the other, never, and that you are brothers? Yes." The man who was whizzing around like a top turned quicker and quicker. The warriors assembled and followed his movements with ever-increasing interest. "Ow!" cried the old Negro once more. "But if one of you lie to the other, betray him, rob him, poison him, or kill him, he shall be accursed." "He shall be accursed," repeated all the warriors. "And if he be a liar and contemplate treason, he shall not swallow the blood of his brother, but spit it out before our eyes." "Oh, before our eyes, and he shall die. He shall die. Wobo shall tear him to pieces, Wobo, or a lion, or a lion. An elephant shall tread him down, yes, and a rhinoceros and buffalo. Oh, and a buffalo," repeated the chorus. "And a snake shall bite him. A snake. And his tongue shall turn black, black, and his eyes shall drop out of his head, and he shall walk with his heels in the air. Ha! With his heels in the air." Staś and Kali had to bite their lips to keep from laughing, while still more terrible oaths were being repeated, and the top turned around so fast that their eyes could not follow its movements. The old Negro kept this up until his strength was exhausted and his breath gave out. Then he sat down on the ground a while and swayed his head from side to side. Soon he arose, and grasping a knife, cut Kali's arm, and moistening a piece of the goat's liver with his blood, pushed it into Mrua's mouth, and a second piece moistened with the blood of the king he pushed into Kali's mouth. Both men swallowed the pieces so quickly that a rattling noise could be heard in their throats, and their eyes nearly started out of their heads. Then they held each other by the hand, as a sign of true and eternal friendship. Then the warriors exclaimed joyfully, "Both men have swallowed it. Neither of them spit it out. Therefore they are sincere, and there is no treachery between them." And in his heart Staś thanked Kali for having represented him at this ceremony, for he felt that had he attempted to swallow a piece of Mrua, he might have proved himself insincere and a traitor. Henceforth the little travelers were in no danger of having snares laid for them, or of being unexpectedly attacked by the savages. On the contrary, the greatest friendship was shown them, and they were almost worshipped as gods. This worship increased when Staś, having noticed a great fall in Linde's barometer, foretold that rain was coming, and on that very day it rained quite heavily as if the Masika, which was already over, was trying to squeeze out its last drops on the earth. The Negroes were convinced that the good Mzimu had given them this shower of rain, and their gratitude to Nell was boundless. Staś teased her, saying that now she was the idol of the Negroes. He could continue the journey alone, and would leave her behind in the Negro village, where the Negroes would erect a small chapel of elephants' tusks for her, and would bring her beans and bananas as peace offerings. But Nell felt so sure of his attachment to her that she simply reached up on her tiptoes and whispered in his ear, "You will not leave me behind." Then she began to hop with joy, declaring that, as the Negroes were so kind, the journey to the ocean could be readily and quickly made. All this took place in front of the tent before the assembled multitude, and when old Mrua saw the Mzimu happy, he also began to hop as high as his crooked legs would let him, believing that in this way he was demonstrating his piety. Following his example, the chief officers began to dance, and so did the warriors, the women, and children, and in fact, all the inhabitants of the village hopped about as though bereft of their senses. This exhibition given by the idol amused Staś so much that he laughed himself almost sick. On the following night he earned the everlasting gratitude of the pious king and his subjects, for when some elephants raided the banana fields, he rode toward them on King and set off several rockets into their midst. The panic which the fiery snakes created was even greater than he had expected. The enormous animals, dreadfully frightened, filled the whole jungle with the sound of their trumpeting and their stamping, and in blind haste they knocked one another down. The powerful king took great pleasure in following his fleeing comrades, and struck at them unsparingly with his trunk and tusks. After such a night it would be a long time before another elephant would dare approach the banana plantations of the village ruled over by old Mrua. The dispersal of the elephants was followed by great rejoicing in the village, and the Negroes spent the whole night dancing and drinking millet beer and palm wine. Kali then learned many important things from them, for it so happened that several of them had come from the borders of a large sheet of water surrounded by mountains and lying toward the east. This proved to Staś that the lake, which he had never seen mentioned in any geography, really existed, and that if they continued in the same direction, they would meet the Wahimas. From the fact that Mia and Kali spoke almost the same language, he argued that Wahima was probably a local name, and that the tribes living on the banks of the Baso Narok belonged to the Shillooks, whose country extended from the Nile far away toward the east. At the time of the Mahdi, these places were still unexplored.
Remember to subscribe.